All In Sports Network. We love sports.
It is Tuesday, December 10th, right here on All In Horns, your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns. I'm Tanner Carlson. That's Jake Jimerson. This is brought to you by Rogue Sports Network, and we are a couple days removed from the SEC Championship. The brackets for the college football playoffs have been set. We're probably not going to get in too deep of a conversation when it comes to the actual bracket. Texas is the 5 seed. They will play Clemson. The winner of the Texas-Clemson game will play Arizona State, the Big 12 championship winner. And that game will be played in Austin. So the Texas Longhorns will host one of the first ever college football playoff games. Just to get that information out there, we will dive deeper into this. We've got 2 weeks to figure this thing out and to talk about this. So we're not just going to beat it over the head over, that length of time. We've got other things that we're going to get into, like Texas volleyball, advancing to the Sweet 16. Very exciting stuff. They are the 3 seed in the tournament. They will be playing later on this week, or we're going to dive into what they've already done, how they got to that point, and who they have ahead of them. Texas men's basketball with on a losing end after winning 7 straight games to UConn, 76-65. We'll talk a little bit about that. Also, transfer portal has officially begun. Texas currently is looking at 5 players who have entered the transfer portal. And Jake, since he was unable to give his thoughts on the Justice Terry recruitment, he will give those. And he's also going to explain revenue sharing. He is a much smarter individual than I am, so I did not get into the weeds of that, but he did. So he'll kind of clear the air when it comes to those question marks. And then we will give our final thoughts on Georgia, some of the post-game remarks that Steve Sarkisian said and some of the players have said. And so we will take it from there. And then probably tomorrow's episode, if you are wanting a more in-depth look at our thoughts on the college football playoff rankings and bracket and all the final sayings and the Texas matchup between Clemson, we're probably going to start that conversation a little bit more tomorrow. But anyway, for the time being, Jake, let's go ahead, get started with the big news of the Texas volleyball team advancing to the Sweet 16. Congratulations to them in the first round. They played that last week on Thursday. They beat Texas A&M Corpus Christi 3-0. Was never close. None of those sets were anywhere close in the round of 64. They played that game in Austin. They stayed in Austin for Friday, and they played the 6 seed USC. That was a much closer game. Now, Texas ended up winning 3-0, but all of those sets, Texas won by 2 or 3 points. And so USC gave Texas everything they had. Texas will play the 2 seed Creighton in the Sweet 16 on Friday, December 13th, later on this week at 12 noon. So if you are at work and it's close to the holiday season, you don't have a whole lot to do, flip that on to your streaming service at work, have it on in the background or have it on in the foreground. I don't really care if you want to watch it straight up. That's perfectly fine, but support the Texas Longhorn women's volleyball team. They're doing well. Jake, any thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, now's the time to get hot if you're Texas volleyball. I mean, if you look at their season as a whole, they were really good the entire season, other than
strange.
one. They lost a couple games at the start of the season. That's pretty normal, especially since they had a tough schedule. But they just had that 1 4-game stretch where they just lost to everyone.
Yeah.
And then other than that, they ended the year pretty much winning out, I believe, from that.
Yeah, they won out. They won out after the 3-game losing streak in the middle of the season. They lost to Texas A&M, Oklahoma, and Missouri, I believe, and then they won out and then ended up getting the 3 seed. And they, obviously have done the damage
and righted the wrong of like Oklahoma. They won that, I think, like 3-0 the second time around. So they definitely. It's got a little bit of rut in the middle of the season, and I mean, if I don't imagine anyone is eager to play against them. Especially them being a 3 seed, they still have a ton of talent. And I just on a side note, when it comes to volleyball as a whole, I've watched a lot more this year, especially Texas. But the tournament, I've been trying to watch some. I'll probably try to watch a lot more as it's now to the final 16 teams.
Yeah.
But volleyball viewership as a whole was up, I think, 35% over last year.
Do you think that has anything to do with NIL and just recognition of these players now? And, Madison Skinner, and she's in a commercial every Saturday whenever I'm watching, college football. A lot of these volleyball players getting more recognition on a national scale because they are allowed to kind of, sell their name, image, and likeness.
It can't hurt. And, just with a lot of the games being broadcasted on major networks as well. I think that makes it a little bit easier too. So I think it's a combination of, multiple factors. And I think once people give it a chance, I think people are just like, wow, I actually want to watch more of this. It's really exciting. And people who never gave volleyball a chance just because it's not one of the big three, all of a sudden watch it and go, wow, this is really exciting. A really exciting sport. In my opinion, the most fun women's sport to watch. And it's a sport that is woman dominated as well. It's not, I guess softball but it's just the equivalent of baseball essentially.
Yeah.
Volleyball is, I know there's men's volleyball leagues, but like women's volleyball is the premier volleyball.
Yes. Women's volleyball, men's volleyball down here, and, but yeah, I agree with you. I think it's fast paced. It's up tempo. It's a quick set. It's not something that is going to drag out and you're just like watching paint dry or anything. It's quick, exciting. There's big plays and there's some really athletic play. I mean, these girls are jumping out of the gym. Yeah. Freakish athletes.
They're easily taller than you, but that's not saying much.
That's not saying taller.
They're even taller than I am at 6'3". I mean, these girls are tall, athletic, and I wouldn't want to be in the way of Madison Skinner when she's spiking it personally. I can guarantee that, but
your face would look like Wilson off of Castaway.
Yeah, yes, it would. But from just a high level, it's easy to understand what's going on too. There's a lot of strategies and intricacies that I don't understand and the average viewer doesn't understand, but you can sit down and watch it and understand what's going on easier than the majority of sports.
Yeah. Jake, let's go ahead and move along. We've got some things to say about the Texas men's basketball loss to UConn. An absolute dreadful first half, a much better second half. I don't know if that was attributed to UConn kind of pulling off the dogs a little bit, getting some of their depth players in, and then Texas kind of recouping and being able to play better in that second half from behind when there's less pressure. But this was at home, and Texas really from opening tip never really stood a chance. You look at those first half numbers, 30% from the field. They were 16% from three-point line in the first half. 50% from the free throw line. Absolutely dreadful numbers. Second half, again, like I said, much better. 54% from the field, 64% from three. That'll help. Probably taking less threes as well also helped. But then 80% from the free throw line. Kaluma had 20 points. Trey Johnson had 24 points. Those are really the only two scorers, although Tremont Mark, Jordan Pope, guys like that do exist on this team and can score points. We're just not getting any contribution from them, and I don't think it's them as players. I think it's most a bit coaching.
Yeah, the first half was embarrassing, quite honestly. It was. I've seen better run offenses from pickup basketball at the gym, quite frankly. They had 1 assist in the first half. UConn had 12 assists on 14 field goals in the first half. Texas had 1 assist the entire first half, and they got that 19 minutes in.
Yeah.
And Texas, we have said it, we've hinted at it, that when we watched them, they just don't really appear to run much of an offense. It's all ISO ball, and I think that really hurts the Popes and apparently the Marks, though he's coming off an injury, so it's still tough to tell. But and Julian Lair, it's hurting a lot of these guys who have played elsewhere and scored much more on a per game basis and are just not having any games where they score any points. The defense is one thing. That typically gets better as the season goes on, especially for a team that is newly together. But when you're not running any resemblance of an offense, that to me lies on coaching. And I know they lack a big man, but they are actually better in that category than last year, just because you add a guy like Kaluma, who is a great rebounder. That's something Texas didn't have last year. They are a much better roster this year than they were last year, but they look like the same team, if not worse so far. I'd say probably the same team, because this looked a lot like the UConn game did last year. Terrible first half, flirted with the comeback in the second half, but could never really cut
it. It was never going to happen. They were never going to come back and beat UConn at any point. I never felt that way.
No, I mean, when they cut it to 8, I think they cut to 8 one time with like 9 minutes left. It was interesting for about 30 seconds, and then UConn slammed the door shut.
But Jake, can you not tell? And if anybody just has somewhat of a like basketball IQ of a brain, and I'm that's not an insult to anybody who just watches casually. That's perfectly fine. I do think your casual viewer could tell the difference between Coach Dan Hurley and Coach Rodney Terry. I mean, there are drastic differences in terms of how they approach the game, how their team runs an offense and runs the floor, and how they cohesively work together as a unit. I don't think Rodney Terry, with a player like Trey Johnson, knows how to run an offense that is centered around him but doesn't rely on solely one or two guys scoring. Does that make sense? I think he solely relies on Trey Johnson putting up the shots. He's like, look, once every 2 possessions, Trey Johnson needs a shot. Once every 2 possessions, Kaluma needs a shot. Well, who does that leave shots for? Anybody else that's not just opportunistic basketball, getting an offensive rebound, or, just happens to get an open lane and score in transition or something like that. Because that's what it seems like it's going through, is the offense is running through 2 players, and only 2 players in set offenses are actually getting shots off. And yet everybody else, any of the other players out there on the field, whether it's a Julian Larry or Jordan Pope, Tremont Martin, whoever it is, even as Shedrick, is just getting opportunistic baskets in terms of second chance points. They get an open lane, transition points, and that's really about it.
Yeah, it's just not fun basketball to watch.
It's not at all.
And when you don't, that is the reason why, even when they are winning some of these games or play well for the most part through a whole game, they still have in every single game that stretch, those flat lines in the game flow we talk about, where they go 4 minutes without scoring, and it's common occurrence. Every Longhorn fan who's watched the basketball team the last couple of years has seen those. It cost them a lot of games last year. It's going to cost them a lot of games this year if it doesn't get fixed, and it's going to cost Rodney Terry his job, in my opinion, this year. I mean, I don't think Chris Del Conte will be slow to move. If they completely flop this year, they have another year like last year, maybe lets it ride one more year just so it's not as big of a buyout. But I would not be shocked if the Texas men's basketball program is looking for a new coach next year, unless things change. I mean, Rodney Terry has the whole season to figure it out, and I hope he figures it out. Yeah. We both wanted him to be hired. He earned the job. You had to hire him, in my opinion, with the run he went on. I just think it would have been a bad look for the university if you don't hire him. But that's why they didn't, commit to some huge contract for him. It was a 4-year deal, making, below what the top coaches make. I think he makes around half of what Hurley makes, for instance. And Texas isn't afraid to spend big. And if they feel like he's not the guy, they will go out and spend much more than they've spent on Rodney Terry to try to find the right guy.
Jake, I have noticed a trend with Chris Del Conte. He has a great pulse on when to hire somebody and when their time is up. He's given them enough time to get the job done. If they don't get the job done, he cuts ties and he upgrades. Look at the baseball program. Look at the women's basketball program.
Keep in mind, he didn't hire David Pierce as well. Rodney Terry is his only hire so far that's not working out. But I wouldn't say, and maybe some people disagree with this, I don't think it's not a Chris Del Conte hire. He was kind of forced into it, not in a bad way. It was success on the court that forced him, but there was no shot. There was no
Chris Del Conte has a good pulse
to hire.
He's got a good pulse on what the fan base is asking, because the fan base was asking for Rodney Terry. If Chris Del Conte didn't hire Rodney Terry, there would have been a revolt. I mean, the fan base would have gone berserk. The national media would have also gone berserk. Everybody at that time, whenever Rodney Terry makes it to an Elite Eight on an interim basis, you have no other option but to extend him in that instance, and he deserved it. He deserved
And the players
extension.
loved him too.
And the players loved him. And guess what? He had a decent recruiting and transfer class coming in. He did a lot of the recruiting. And so we haven't really seen a major drop off in terms of talent coming into Texas. If anything, this is his most talented team. It's just not resulting in the results in the play on the court now. And there are moments, stretches through a game where he dramatically gets outcoached, and it happens nearly every single game, and it shouldn't happen every single game.
Yeah, I mean, there's just too many stretches in a game, and it's the offensive end to me. Sure, there's times where the defense doesn't play great, but also in basketball, especially once you get to that high D1 level, sometimes the other team's just going to make shots. Yeah. It happens to everyone. I mean, unless you're like a Virginia, sometimes the other team is just going to make shots. And, but to me, it's how does your offense look? And there's no resemblance of, it doesn't even look like they have plays. I mean, it's that bad.
Yeah. No, they just go out there and run it. So that's our basketball talk. That's our volleyball talk. Let's go ahead and update people on the transfer portal going on early on Monday. Jake, we had 5 names enter the portal. One was obvious, and we already knew that was coming. That is sophomore wide receiver Jonte Cook. Right now, it's looking like Oregon and Texas A&M probably have the most interest in Cook. I think there's that was also during his recruiting as well. Texas A&M was a top candidate. I believe they were in his top 3 when he was in the recruiting phase. Redshirt sophomore Jaray Bledsoe, redshirt sophomore defensive lineman Aaron Bryant, redshirt freshman linebacker Darren Goulet, and redshirt freshman edge linebacker Tosili Akana. I'm not entirely sure how the pronunciation on that. I'm sure I messed that up. Some names on there that aren't surprising. I think the only one, Jake, Darren Goulet, I think you and I were big fans of his in terms of the potential. Now, did he ever kind of live up to that hype? Did he ever have time to live up to the hype? That's remains to be seen. It's not going to be seen. I do think wherever he transfers, he's probably going to a decent school, maybe an SEC, maybe a Big Ten school, and I do believe that he will have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, I see him going to, based on the fact he's, from all accounts I've read, he's transferring because he wants to play now. Yeah. He goes to a middle of the road power conference team and probably is a pretty good linebacker. I think he looked at the depth chart and he said, I'm probably not going to play until I'm a, redshirt senior, with Ty Anthony Smith in front of him, Leona LaFau. You have Bo Barnes coming in, who's immensely talented. You look at the numbers for Texas and you go, well, they only are going to have like 5 or 6 scholarship linebackers next year. Well, what they lack in quantity, they do not lack in quality. And that is going to be a very loaded linebacker room. And I imagine they're going to probably try to add one through the portal as well. But I was disappointed to see him go just because I do think he could have developed and been a very good player for the Longhorn defense. But at the end of the day, you just have to expect this kind of stuff in this transfer portal era. You're going to have some guys who stick with the process, go through it, and then are really good players for a year or two at the end of their college careers, and then end up getting drafted by only playing 1 or 2 years. You're going to have some guys who just want to get on the field early, and I can't blame them. And they're going to take that option and go and not risk staying and maybe not ever being quite good enough to start at Texas. I'm not saying that's the case here, but when you're looking at it as a player, you probably got to figure that into your equation. And then just on a side note, when it comes to the portal, I think Texas is going to be very, very aggressive this year in the portal, both in this first window and in the second window. I imagine they are going to be going all in. But actual all in, not Jerry Jones all in, because they're going to want to surround Arch Manning with talent for next year. I'm already hearing some names for them. USC running back Quentin Joyner. He's a Central Texas product. He had the most yards per carry in the Big Ten, 63 carries, 478 yards, 3 touchdowns. He's 5'11", just above 215. So he's about the size I think Texas would want. I imagine they're going to try to get not only a running back, but a running back that can come in and produce right away. I think they've realized that Baxter injury hurt a lot. You can't really rely on him being what you thought he was going to be this year, next year, just coming off that injury. I imagine they're going to try to hit it big with a running back in the portal. And then there's also an offensive tackle out of Rice. I'm blanking on the name and I can't find it right now, but he gave up, I think, 1 pressure all season. And he's a guy that they're also kicking the tires on. And so I imagine they're going to be aggressive. They're going to get offensive linemen, some defensive linemen, probably 1 linebacker, probably a running back. Sark always grabs a receiver or 2. And they could even look at quarterback. They're probably going to try to bolster the secondary. They probably have an idea if Taff is going to return. So look for Texas to probably take more portal players than normal this year.
Yeah, I believe that there's going to be also some Florida State guys that are going to be interested in a move that have talent and aren't even bad players. They're just not getting the development that they need. I know there's a linebacker and a defensive lineman. The names are escaping me. Should have done better at taking notes on that. I remember looking them up, but those guys kind of stood out to me as well. And then there is a defensive lineman for Texas A&M, former 5-star, who entered the transfer portal in terms of adding depth to that front 7. I wouldn't be surprised if Texas kicked the tires. Again, these guys have to be culture fits. They can't just be good players or good players out of high school. They have to, fit into what they want now. I think that's something that was really big on guys like Leona Lafau coming in from this last season, was these guys fit the culture that Coach PK and Coach Sark want in their roster. And that's vital to having success in the transfer portal. It's not just getting guys because they were big names coming out of high school and they didn't pan out at the school that they committed to. It's about also fitting in with what you've already got going on.
Yeah. You kind of have to be transferring for the right reasons in
Right.
a way. Like a Bear Alexander, I as much as Texas needs
No
D
chance.
linemen,
Nope.
and he apparently wants to go to Texas,
I'd stay away.
they're either going to go after him and put him on a very short leash, like they've done some people, or they're just not even going to even contact him. The offensive lineman from Rice is Ethan Onyemwa, I think is how you say it. Again, probably butchering it. He's 6'6", 345, and allowed 1 sack on 294 pass blocking attempts on the year. I know he's from Rice, but that's a guy that Texas is going to definitely go after. He's going to be one of the most sought after offensive tackles. And with looking at who your right tackle is going to be next year, right now it'd be Brandon Baker, who is going to be a true sophomore. You probably want to at least have depth there, if not someone to compete with him for that job to push him.
Yeah. You also get the news of Connor Wingman entering the transfer portal from Texas A&M. You've got guys like TJ Metcalf out of Arkansas entering the
Jackson
Arnold. So you've got some guys also in the SEC that will be looking at new places. Jaheim Otis from Alabama. He's a defensive lineman. He's a junior. So a lot of names to keep an eye out on, guys that are in the SEC that are talented enough to stay in the SEC. And so it will give you any update and every update that we possibly can as we move forward. And there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. It's like as soon as we hit end on record, there's updated news on the transfer portal. So we'll try to get it to you as updated as we possibly can. Let's go ahead.
One more big name.
Yep.
Because Texas fans will want to hear this. Tommy Doman, the punter from Michigan. That's one Texas is going to go after. I'm sure they're just going to get the best possible punter.
I believe the Mizzou punter also entered the transfer portal as well. And I think he was actually like rated at like star ranking coming out of high school.
Well, then you get him. You just get someone a punter. You do not rely on, I know Kern's a freshman. He could get better. You bring in competition at the very least, because the punting has been quite literally one of the worst in the country.
Even at kicker. I don't care about, if Bert Auburn if he's going to continue going into the offseason and spring, summer camp, the way he's been kicking now, you might as well bring in some competition.
If you have Bert Auburn and last year Texas wins the SEC championship, point blank. Take all the other crap aside, all the other stuff Texas did wrong in that game, penalties, interception, everything. Texas wins that game if they just have Bert Auburn from last season.
Yep. All right, Jake. Speaking of these off-season moves, transfer portal, recruiting, your thoughts on Justice Terry, and then also revenue sharing as well whenever you get to that point. But talk a little bit about your thoughts on Justice Terry. I know you weren't able to make the little 10-minute video that I had put up in terms of the breaking news, but I know you have some thoughts on it.
Yeah, this was probably the biggest shocker of a commit going to Texas I think I've seen in my time keeping up with recruiting. Just because he has been considered a Georgia lock for ever since he decommitted from USC back in, I believe, the summer or the spring. And this is just someone Kirby Smart doesn't miss on. He's in the state of Georgia. He's a defensive lineman. He's the number one defensive tackle in the entire recruiting class. He is surefire as a defensive lineman can be coming out of high school. And it not only that, but it was a position of need for Texas. I think you and I discussed it. I hope on the pod, maybe it wasn't. But if we were choosing between getting Fasusi or Justice Terry, there was no question you wanted Justice Terry. Mm-hmm. He's the better player. He's going to make a more immediate impact, and it was a much bigger position of need for Texas. When he made the hook 'em horn sign and announced he was going to Texas, I was driving, going to do an inventory count for my job out in the middle of nowhere, and I about had to pull over because I went nuts in my car all by myself. Not just because it got him the number one recruiting class, but that was the biggest recruit of the class that they got as well. I'm excited to see him get on the 40 acres. Texas probably dropped a bag on him, and rightfully so in this era. Georgia dropped their Justice Terry bag on the officials. So, I guess Georgia's probably happy with how it worked out as well.
You gotta make the trade if you can.
Yeah. But that was a huge get. And I just very excited to see him get on this team. I imagine he's going to make an immediate impact next year. I'd be surprised if he's not the Colin Simmons of next season, if you will. He needs to add on a little weight, but he's got the strength, the explosion.
He's a monster.
Watch his film. He's just bullying children.
Well, the fun thing about him, Jake, is he is not a one-dimensional, one-position guy. You can put him at edge. You can put him at defensive tackle. You can put him at the 3 tech. You can put him at the 4 tech. You can put him wherever you want him on the defensive line, and he can make a play for you. And he can be on short yardage, short goal line situations. He can be on pass rush situations as well. I think that's what sets him apart from a lot of other interior defensive linemen, is that he's not a one-trick pony. The dude has a pass rush. The dude can be set on the edge. The dude can plug up the middle on a goal line stand. He's such a versatile talent at that position. And yes, he's going to put on muscle. And yes, he's going to put on a little bit of weight when he gets to campus. And that's scary. That is really scary.
And he's an early enrollee as well. Yeah. Also, I listened to a couple interviews from him. Really soft-spoken, just good kid. Yeah. He just seems like someone that is going to mesh really well with this Texas culture.
Not going to drag race 100 miles an hour on I-35.
No, and maybe that was a turnoff for him when he went to Georgia. Might have jumped in a car with the wrong player. But, and also Kenny Baker as well. Just
shout out to Kenny Baker.
Absolutely. To Kenny Baker, because he was heavily involved in this recruitment.
Also, notice too, Jake, on the Kenny Baker thing. I didn't want to forget it before we move on. But the transfer portal, you see a lot of these defensive linemen who were here before Kenny Baker. They gave it a season under Kenny Baker. They're like, okay, maybe it's just not for me. It's not working out. We're not meshing. The relationship isn't there. It's not anything against Kenny Baker and his development. He probably wants to get his own guys in as well.
Yeah. And to his credit, he is recruiting better than Bo Davis ever did. Mm-hmm. And it seems like he's got the development side going as well. He turned Alfred Collins and Broughton into the best versions of them we've seen. We've also just seen all the defensive linemen improve throughout the season. Look at Sadir Mitchell and tell me Kenny Baker isn't heavily involved in not only keeping him in the fold, which I imagine Texas is going to be doing everything they can to make sure he stays now. And I hopefully he does, because he has been able to play some snaps for them all of a sudden. And Kenny Baker had to be instrumental in turning that thing around for Sadir Mitchell, who I think pretty much everyone thought was for sure going to be already declared to the transfer portal at this point, after the midseason altercation on the sidelines. And now instead he's turned it around and earned his way back to the field. And I think he was listed the scout team player of the week 3 weeks in a row. And that stuff matters in this type of program.
It does. That's
absolutely. Not some people go, oh, scout team player of the week. No, it matters under Sarkisian's program. This isn't Tom Herman with a piss chart. I mean, this stuff actually matters.
Yeah. All right, Jake, what do you want to do? We're running on the 30-minute mark.
Revenue sharing. This isn't as complicated as I thought it was going to be.
Give a little bit on revenue sharing. We'll probably wrap the episode. I think it's a good stopping point just on the way the episode has gone. We'll cut it off, and then we will give our final thoughts on Georgia and everything else we have to talk about going into the college football playoffs on tomorrow's episode.
Yeah, so keep in mind with revenue sharing, everything is still subject to change. There could be new laws passed, and also schools haven't fully decided how they're going to go about handling this. But revenue sharing is basically, it's not setting a cap. It's more so setting a minimum, because any school, and you can opt into doing revenue sharing or you can opt out. I imagine every big school is going to opt in because it makes no sense not to. You would put yourself at a huge disadvantage from recruiting. But what's going to be interesting is to see what happens with these NIL collectives, because there's a chance these collectives could roll into the athletic departments and handle dispersing the money. And then the NIL deals would come from the NIL department in the athletic department, would probably help set players up with it, but it'd also be more so outside businesses coming in. But I think what you're going to end up seeing is this revenue sharing goes to all of the athletic, all the sports teams. And I think next year, the first year it's going to be in place, it's 20 million and it's going to go up every year. It's a percentage of the earned revenues for the schools from the athletic departments. And I think what you're going to see is, a team is going to look at a 5-star quarterback, right? And they're going to go, we're going to give you $500,000 out of our revenue sharing a year. And then you're going to see the NIL collective or whatever. If there's something new that forms and the collectives merge with the athletic department, you're going to see outside things come in and go, we'll also give you another 500,000 and make it $1 million a year. So this revenue sharing at the end of the day is basically putting more of a minimum, based on my understanding of it, than more so a cap, which is what I thought it was going to be whenever it first came out. And so I hope I explained that well. There are some articles out there about it.
Think of it as like the NFL salary cap, except it's not a limit. It's the base as to what they're allowed to have or whatever.
And all the sports teams will be a part of it. Obviously, more money is going to be sent to the bigger money making programs, which does make sense just from a logistical perspective. But you're still going to see NIL deals, which was the big thing I wanted to know out of this is NIL still going to exist, still be a heavy part in recruiting? And it is. So if anything, this helps actually, I think this helps some of the lower schools more because it's going to give them more money that's guaranteed to go to this so that they at least have some base to compete with these top schools.
When you say lower tier, is it like lower tier SEC, like Mississippi State, Kentucky, or lower tier Boise State, UNLV?
Lower tier meaning the higher end of like the G5 and then the middle to lower ends of the Power 4. Yeah. Especially the lower, like a Mississippi State. This is probably going to help out a lot that just don't have the NIL that a Texas does, that even a Missouri does, Georgia, and all these top programs. Yeah. Ole Miss. I think it's going to help some of those schools just because it gives a way for the school to directly compensate the players as opposed to having to do it through these weird, hard to understand NIL deals that are still really kind of coming from the school.
Right.
I just think it adds some clarity and it makes easier for schools to go, okay, we're not breaking rules and we're still able to give some money to the players. I think it'll help out those kind of schools I listed. For Texas, it's just going to be a drop in the bucket at the end of the day.
Think of it like this. All right. If you're Barstool fans, Jake and I are, if you're Brandon Walker, you can't get the #1 quarterback in the country to commit to your school by dropping in a heavy donation. If you're Barstool president, Dave Portnoy, you can put a heavy donation into the program to your favorite school to get the #1 recruit in the country. That's kind of a good, example to Mississippi State, Michigan. This kind of allows that to kind of teeter-totter a little bit.
It's not going to balance
It won't.
but it's
It
going
won't.
to give Mississippi State, and I'm trying to think of some other, in Arizona State even, some of these other schools, a foot to stand on, not only for recruiting, but also for, I think one of the biggest things for these programs like that is going to be is player retention. You've had Arizona State head coach come out and talk about it this week, being like, I can't blame our players. They got to decide between playing for the school they love or getting money to support their family. That's life-changing. And just playing for a different school to do it. This will give those teams, those programs, something to fight back with that allows them to go directly through the school, as opposed to doing all these weird NIL deals that not all these schools are going to invest all the money into lawyers and everything that it takes to set up these collectives to make it to where it works within the guidelines. Just a lot of these schools don't have the resources to do that. Now they'll have a way to make sure that they can get players some money.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's going to do it for today's episode. Again, join us Tuesdays through Fridays. These episodes drop at noon in the middle of your day. So right at around lunchtime, we will be right there ready for you with all the updates we can possibly give you. Like, share, subscribe to the channel. Please keep liking, keep commenting, put your alerts on, and follow Jake and I on social media. You see our handles right there at the bottom of your screen. We will give you updates on any breaking news or anything as well on those media channels. So for Jake Jimerson, I'm Tanner Carlson. This is your daily fix for all things Texas Longhorns right here on All In Horns. Welcome.
All in Sports Network. We love sports.